for the over 10,000 fans in attendance at the Hayes-Lehman game this Friday night, they were in for a real treat as both squads played very well and played to their fullest in what was a back-and-forth ball game between the Rebels and the Lobos, but it was the Rebels who got the better of Lehman this year once again, as Hayes, via a very outstanding, very fantastic, very thrilling touchdown pass from Caleb Kimbrough to David Mayberry, gave the Rebels the go-ahead score and gave them a 28-27 lead, of which they would not relinquish. Lehman falling to the Hayes Rebels 28-27 in a thrilling, exciting ball game in Bob Shelton Stadium Friday night. For the Rebels, they were dependent on their quarterback, Caleb Kimbrough, who stepped up very well against the Lobos. Kimbrough threw for 171 yards. He was 7 of 14 passing. He played very well on Friday night. Got the one touchdown to Mayberry. He kept the Rebels in the ball game on Friday. Had he not played as well as he did, I'm not quite sure the Rebels would be able to keep themselves afloat. The reasoning is that Hayes' running attack, of which they used extensively in the first half, was just getting stymied by a Lobo defense, of which was just flat out stingy. This Lobo defense for Lehman had, in fact, in the previous games that they played this year, is fantastic. They have only allowed to this point 21 points scored against them this year. Only 21 points through 4 games. The only teams that scored against them were St. Michael's in the first game, and then the last week's game, San Antonio Jefferson. Lehman's defense is very good, and they showed it against the Hayes Rebels tonight in certain points. But it was Caleb Kimbrough's efforts that helped the Rebels overcome that burden. But it was a big fourth quarter play at the end of the ball game which gave the Rebels their go-ahead touchdown to win it. And it was an exciting play where Kimbrough was faced with a 4th and 6 at the Lehman 15-yard line late in the fourth. He took the snap out of the shotgun. He tried to roll to his right, back to his left, back to his right, eluding defenders all along the way, and finally finding Taven Mayberry in the end zone, who wasn't really wide open either. He actually had someone that was defending him. He was kind of ready to swat the pass away, but it was just a well-thrown ball by Kimbrough, who essentially put on his Case McCoy hat and made a brilliant play to give the Hayes the go-ahead score, which made it 28-27 at the time. For the Lobos, it was a well-done effort. You can't fault the Lehman players for what happened. It was all Levi Medley in this one. It was his efforts and his gameplay of which gave the Lobos that oomph in this one. They really put their chips, the Lobos did, the entire team, the entire fan base, on Levi Medley. The senior rushed for 227 yards on 37 carries, scored 3 touchdowns. He, in fact, Medley helped score the opening touchdown, a 56-yard touchdown run, and he capped off the scoring for the Lobos with a 7-yard run in the fourth quarter. Those were brilliant plays, well-done plays. But at the end, for the Lobos, they just didn't have enough on the offensive side of the ball to really complement Levi Medley. Their quarterback, Matthew Anguiano, the senior, he did his best, but he was limited because of the fact that the Lobos just don't pass that much. They rely on Medley to run the football, and they just couldn't quite get their passing game in order. Anguiano got 51 yards. He was 3 of 8 passing. The Lobos just never really threw the ball. They were never comfortable passing, and that's really what was their demise tonight. They just couldn't pass the ball at the times they needed to, and especially towards the latter part of the ball game when the Lobos were faced with 3rd and 4th down with about 5 minutes to go. They just couldn't pass the ball to get that first down. Hayes took over in the final 5 minutes and never relinquished possession. Now, on that note, the Lobos had their issues, but the players played well. The coaching staff for the Lobos did well too, except for the end of the ball game. I think a lot of fans might agree with this. Lehman's coaching staff, headed by Steve Davis, they did a very well done job. They did a good job and keeping the defense intact and trying to stop a very potent passing attack from Hayes. But at the end of the game, the coaching staff just expired too many of their timeouts at the end of the ballgame, especially in the fourth quarter on some moments where they didn't need to use a timeout. Mostly because the coaching staff didn't know what play to send to their quarterback in the fourth quarter. They took way too long. The play clock was running down, and they had to call timeout to avoid a penalty. And it's those kind of things that I think a lot of fans were frustrated at with the coaching staff. That kind of let Lehman down in the fourth quarter. Because they had to use those timeouts, they couldn't halt Hayes' final drive in the last 5 minutes of the ball game. They couldn't stop them because they couldn't call timeouts to save some time on the clock to give their players some rest and direction to halt the Rebels in that final 5 minutes. Hayes could do everything they wanted to in that final 5 minutes, and they did it to perfection. All in all, though, this was a fun ball game. This was really fun to watch. Lehman was up by 12 after the first quarter. It was 19-14. The Hayes cut that lead into that lead pretty well at halftime, and there was an exciting fourth quarter. Both teams played very well, but at the end, it just seemed like the Lobos kind of ran out of gas at the end. They just didn't have enough on their team to kind of overcome that final Hayes effort at the end of the night. So, for the Hayes Rebels, they get the big victory, especially after last week's game against Hutto, where the Rebels kind of had a second-half collapse and ended up losing to the Hippos and on their homecoming night in the West last weekend. So they get a big win. They're now 3-2. The Rebels are 1-0 in district, and next week they will be at home. They'll play against Alamo Heights at Shelton Stadium. For the Lobos, they suffer their first loss of the year. They're now 4-1, 0-1 in district, and they're still trying to look for that second district win. In fact, Lehman's only district win came against the Elgin Wildcats 2 years ago. So they're still looking for their second district win in their history of their school. They're still looking for it. It's not going to be easy next week for the Lobos. They're going to be on the road at a very, very tough New Braunfels Canyon squad next weekend. Both teams looked very good. Both teams looked outstanding, and both teams' efforts look promising. The question becomes for Hayes and Lehman: can they keep that progression going into the playoffs, or as some call it here in the state of Texas, the second season? That will remain to be seen. Again, the Hayes Rebels win 28-27, and we'll see what happens now that we are halfway through the high school football season.